US Vice President J.D. Vance has made a sensational claim. He has reportedly told the US media that 400 kilograms of uranium is untraceable. And he says this is enough to make 10 nuclear bombs. He also says that he will raise this issue with Iran. Let's go right across to Srinjoy for more on this. Srinjoy, and we have Priyank also joining us from Tel Aviv. Srinjoy, I'm going to come to you first. Srinjoy, this is very significant because now you have J.D. Vance coming out to say that there is a significant amount of enriched uranium which is missing, which means that even though Iran may have been able to transport some of that enriched uranium out of those nuclear plants, they perhaps didn't have time to take it all out. And this is something that US is likely to project as a victory in terms of its own strikes.
Well, if the enriched uranium is missing, the question is, where is it? If it was still in the plants, then there could have been radiation, is one argument. According to people who were part of the nuclear program of India, there is a theory that perhaps the nuclear fuel could well have been taken out in advance. We don't know how much, and if there is local contamination, it would be from the centrifuges, would have very little uranium. But it is possible. Nobody actually knows what the reason is, but there is, first of all, very little contamination according to the IAEA. And secondly, there are reports that perhaps some of the uranium could have been taken out by the Iranians earlier. Now, we don't know what exactly happened, but this is merely what experts believe, that this could have happened. Now, if that is so, then clearly the uranium, the fuel, is still with Iran, and even if it has not been enriched, the uranium is there. That is one theory. We don't know, as I said, Madhav, what the exact situation is, but there is at least a theory among people who are experts in India who have dealt with this over the years, that perhaps some of the material could have been taken out earlier.
All right. Thanks so much, Srinjoy, for the quick update. Let me also get in a word from Priyank, who's on ground in Tel Aviv. Priyank, what are the sources in the IDF and the Israel government telling you? Are they going to take this ceasefire more seriously now? Because after last night's announcement, we saw what has happened on ground. Are they now going to follow and abide by this ceasefire, or will there be more retaliation coming in from Israel's side?
See, Madhav, the situation room here in the Israel has been always active since the time this so-called ceasefire was announced by Donald Trump. But what we have to say regarding this uranium is that Kamal Vandi, who is the spokesperson of Iran's atomic energy, has stated that this is an ongoing process, and certainly this industry cannot be stopped. So he has already given an indication that there is much more which the Iranians can do. 2 days back also, what you also breaking, that there were series of vehicles which were spotted near these Fordo nuclear stations before the US could attack them. So that is clearly suggesting that there is a very high possibility that the uranium has been shifted to a safer location. That's why Kamal Vandi has been saying that it is quite clear that this particular process cannot be ignored. So we have to understand the statement, the no leakage information of by the IAEA, and the kind of statement which has been coming out from Iran.
We'll have to leave it there. Priyank as well as Srinjoy, thanks so much for joining us with those quick updates. Let's quickly take this across to our guests now. With us is Lieutenant General KJS Dhillon, retired former GOC of the 15th Corps. We also have with us Wayne Allen Root, American television host and author. Joining us also is Dr. Doron Avital, ex-commander of Israel's elite special forces. He's also a former member of the Knesset, that is, of course, the parliament there in Israel, as well as a Foreign and Security Committee. Asher Friedman is executive director of the Misgav Institute for National Security and former senior official at Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Nima Tavale is an Iranian journalist who is also joining us on the show. Let me begin my first question with you, Mr. Doron Avital. It seems that President Trump is very frustrated. And interestingly, today his frustration more than Iran is with Israel as he has so stated publicly. How do you look at this?
Yeah, it was quite an expression. It really hit the Israeli public. What happened was that there was a violation by the Iranian in the north, and then Israel felt that they have to retaliate. But I think Trump didn't think the retaliation fit the attack. This one missile that was intercepted, and he was very, I would say, angry with Netanyahu. I would say like this: once the U.S. participated in the attack on Fordo and everything, in some sense they took ownership of the war. In some sense they say we also cut the terms. It's not only Israel against Iran, it's the US participating, and I think he took the liberty to say this is it, I'm calling it a halt, and there's now a ceasefire.
All right, but is it really that simple? Wayne Allen Root, the question is this, that, today you will have many of the analysts globally asking a question as to whether, President Trump, who has, repeatedly in many other conflicts also said that he is, peacemaker, he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. But international diplomacy is not that easy, as President Trump seems to have found out the hard way, and his frustration with it is quite evident now.
Well, I don't know. It sounds to me like you're pretty biased, because last I checked on American news right now, the ceasefire is back on. There's not a failure yet. There was an initial volley from both sides, and now we're back on track again with a ceasefire. I think you're operating on old news. But if there is a violation of the ceasefire, of course it's difficult to get a rogue terrorist nation like Iran to abide by any international rules or any commitments. They lie about everything. They make up what they're going to do, and you can never depend on them to keep their word on anything. So it's a very difficult situation. That I agree with. But at this moment, after an initial volley, the ceasefire is holding. President Trump has gotten them to agree to it, and at the moment they're doing it. I don't see how you can criticize him for that.
All right, let me get in the Iran expert on this as well. Iranian journalist Nima Tavali is also with us on the panel. Nima Tavali, the big question is, is Iran going to now abide by the ceasefire violations? The previous speaker said that with a regime like Iran, it cannot be trusted, and we have seen Iran really violate the ceasefire norms.
I was on this very channel, on this very program, at this very time, exactly 2 days ago, with your colleague Shreya Dundial, saying exactly the same thing I'm about to repeat now, and you can check the tape if you don't believe me. Iran has been crystal clear from the second this war was started by Israel, and that is Israel committed an act of aggression via a Pearl Harbor event in a sneak attack on Iran, and Iran has retaliated. The second Israel stops attacking Iran, then Iran will stop retaliating. The entire responsibility for this has been put on Israel by Iran, which includes the off-ramp as well. Therefore, there is no formal ceasefire, there's no formal agreement to cease hostilities. Israel started, Iran responded. Israel stopped, Israel ceased to retaliate. Israel stopped, Iran ceased to retaliate, as echoed by Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the Iranian Supreme National Security Council today. This really isn't rocket science. Now, regarding the antics of Trump, let's remember that this is a man who boasted about not once but twice coordinating with the Zionist regime to attack Iran. Therefore, this war or conflict is a proxy war between the United States and Iran, no different than the proxy war waged against Russia via Ukraine, which is kind of what Vladimir Putin meant when 3 days ago he said that Iran and Russia are fighting the same people behind the scenes. There is no such thing as Israel as a state acting independently to anyone. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the person in the Trump administration, part of the Trump administration, stated himself that Israel is an American airfield in the Mediterranean, or as former President Joe Biden said back in the 1970s when he was a senator on the floor of the Senate before his brain had deteriorated into Philadelphia cream cheese. He said, and I quote, "If Israel didn't exist, the United States would have to invent an Israel." Well, as it so happens, the United States didn't need to invent Israel. The British imperialists via Lord Balfour did it for them many, many decades ago.
Okay.
Israel's the dog, the Anglo-American Zionist oligarchy and globalists who control and own the U.S. government wholesale are the owners.
Okay.
And as any dog owner will tell you, you are responsible for what your dog does legally and morally.
Okay. Before we get into responsibility, Wayne Allen Root, does that answer your question?
Continue until the U.S. reigns this Zionist.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes,
I hear
go
I'm
ahead.
still talking. Look, Iran is a terrorist nation. You're listening to someone who represents a rogue terrorist nation who
Utter
funds
nonsense.
terrorism all over the world, who
Utter
murders Americans,
nonsense.
who murders Jews all over the world. They've used our money, by the way. It shows you how dumb the Democrat administrations have been in the past. Obama sent them billions. Biden sent them billions. Iran
find
uses
this
our
idiot?
billions to bomb and destroy and terrorize people all over the world, American citizens and Israeli citizens. And one thing is clear, everything else doesn't matter. What he said, what I said, none of it matters. Only thing that matters is we can never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Never. They're madmen. They're religious fanatics. They're fanatical nut jobs. You can't allow people like that to have a nuclear weapon or they will hold the entire world hostage. And we have a right to do, we meaning America or Israel, has a right to do whatever they've got to do. You don't hear much condemnation from Arab nations. They're all for what America and Israel are doing because they're scared of Iran, religious fanatics who lead Iran having a bomb as well. Not mad at the Iranian people.
Let me
They're
put
good
that
people.
question.
It's the leaders of Iran that are nut jobs. That's the problem.
Okay, let me put that question to Nima. Nima, this is what the Gulf Cooperation Council has said. It has come out and condemned Iran's attack at the Al Udeid base in Qatar. Do you see, this is something that, many would consider as a setback for Iran. Qatar also has put out a statement saying that it's a violation of their sovereignty, so on and so forth. So it also appears that while Israel may have its own problems with its neighbors, Iran also appears to be losing friends quite rapidly.
What that gentleman said, this hack was saying before, because that's what he is, a hack, is wrong. I don't represent the Iranian government. I'm an Iranian journalist. But the difference between me and him is that I'm expressing the facts whilst he lives in cloud cuckoo land. He's a Christian Zionist, or just your average run-of-the-mill Zionist. But if he's a Christian
Let's
Zionist,
not get personal.
he's one of those
One second,
crazy
just a second.
people
On my
who
show,
believes-
one second,
who
just a second, please.
believes
Let's
that once
start
the Jews
start
have been
insulting
put
each
in
other
Israel,
because this
Jesus
debate will then
come
descend
back
into
and
name
kill
calling.
them all.
He can equally abuse you, sir. Let's not get personal with anyone. Let's discuss the issues at hand and the facts as they stand. There's plenty to discuss, believe me.
And to lecture anyone on religious fanaticism. He is a religious fanatic. That's what he is. Now, as for the Gulf countries, speaking of religious fanatics, it's hilarious to me that he has the brass neck to talk about them as some sort of cradles of democracy when they are all of them nothing more than theocratic dictatorships propped up via US bases in order to keep the oil flowing.
All right,
so
let me
spare me the sanctimonious nonsense.
Well, many things at play over here. Oil, of course, is a major factor. India is also very concerned about that, and particularly the threat of shutting down the Hormuz Straits is something that has been of immense concern. But let me bring in some of our other panelists as well. Asher Fredman, let me bring you in. Donald Trump's frustration was quite evident in the kind of statement that the US president made. He says that I'm not happy that Israel is going out now. There was one rocket that I guess was fired overboard. It missed its target. Now Israel's going out. These guys got to calm down. We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what they're doing. Of course, that was peppered and laced with another expletive. But the point is this, that even the president of the United States is quite frustrated, and his frustration here, as I mentioned earlier to Doron Avital, appears to be more with Israel than Iran.
We have to look at the facts. President Trump, when he announced the ceasefire at 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time, he said it would come to effect in about 6 hours from now. Israel accepted the ceasefire. Israel kept to the ceasefire. All of Israel's strikes ended within that 6 hour period. Iran violated the ceasefire, fired 3 missiles at Israel after the ceasefire came into effect. And then the question was, to what degree is Israel going to retaliate? And that was the discussion that happened between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. But we're missing the important point. The important point is that Israel, on its own, not with the United States, within 4 days achieved complete aerial superiority over Iran, showed the world that Iran is really nothing more than a paper tiger despite all its bluster and threats, and we're going to destroy Israel. We have a clock that's counting down to the destruction of Israel. Israel wrought extensive damage to Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. I'm sure that an Iranian journalist gave objective analysis of the full extent of the damage to the Iranian regime. But the important point, and this is what I want to say, is that the question is, now that Israel and the United States have caused such significant damage to the nuclear program, to the ballistic program, what happens next? What happens when the Ayatollahs in Tehran begin to rebuild that program, rebuild the nuclear sites, rebuild the ballistic missile arsenal? Because I have no doubt that is what they're going to do. Israel cannot accept ever again an existential threat from its enemies in the region. Israel will need to react. And if the question is, how will the United States and Israel cooperate on that element going forward, that's going to be the key question.
Okay, let me bring in Lieutenant General Dhillon on this. So, Lieutenant Dhillon, purely from a military perspective, who's really the gainer in all of this? Is it Iran? Is it the United States, or is it Israel? Because in terms of the military objectives that Israel set out to do, has it really achieved what it wanted to do? Because we believe, and there are many reports that seem to suggest, that a lot of that enriched uranium is out of there and that they're already preparing for another nuclear weapon. In which scenario, or what are we really looking at in terms of who's really gained from this entire conflict?
Good evening, Madhav, and good evening to the fellow panelists and to your viewers. Madhav, any military campaign, before you start, the militaries set a very clear aim, what they have to achieve, and they set a very clear end state as to where they would like to finish that conflict. In the present circumstances, what appears is that an aim was to denuclearize Iran, which in my opinion has not been met 100%. And end state before they went into this conflict was not very clear as to at what stage they want to stop the war or have a ceasefire. That is number one. Second is, whenever there are ceasefire agreements or discussions, they are held behind the closed doors, and when both the parties agree to the terms and conditions, then the doors are opened and one of the party or both the parties simultaneously come out and announce that at so and so time we would go in for a ceasefire. The ceasefires do not happen on Twitter and True Social. That is the worst thing to do, because before the parties have agreed fully, or one of the condition here was today when the pilots are mid-air and we are trying to call them back just because we have to honor a ceasefire. Now, this type of a condition does not happen at that level, the level at which we are discussing.
Right.
At maturity levels of the nations and the ceasefire where lives are involved, where nuclear emissions are involved, I think we need to be a little more serious in the way we do business in this. And as is evident from the fellow panelists, the hatred or animosity against each other is tremendous. It will take time, and it will take reasonable time for soothing it out before you reach via media or call it a ceasefire or whatever name. I think we need to handle this situation a little more carefully, but militarily I don't think the aims have been achieved or the end state which was envisaged has reached.
Right. Dr. Doron Avital, is that where a lot of the frustration from Israel's side is coming from? Because clearly Israel would have wanted to do a lot more militarily speaking in terms of attacking Iran. It's now being, in a sense, held back with this ceasefire, and perhaps with the announcement coming out of the blue, as it did on social media. Is that something that has Israel also in a very tight and difficult spot, because Israel also has suffered those attacks that we saw in Beersheba today? So is it kind of caught between a rock and a hard place?
I think we have to zoom out and understand the whole complexity. Israel they've been discussing proxies. Hezbollah is a proxy, Hamas is a sort of a proxy, and the fact that we succeeded to bring Hezbollah down and then the collapse of the Syrian regime, this opens up this corridor that enabled to do one of the best strikes in the history of military, and this thing would for sure echo in terms of deterrence. So the question of the objective, we did succeed to degrade the missiles program dramatically. We did succeed to degrade a lot of the infrastructure, the nuclear infrastructure, hit some more than few of the generals. So I think this is a chapter in the landscape of war that is going to be taught. It's time of the end game, this issue of of the enriched material. Of course, this is an issue. I think when Israel went to this war, we knew that this is an issue that is open. It's not like we knew that we can dismantle this. And I think Vance made his position here, but I think many of the objectives achieved, and the deterrence is valid in the Middle East. Everybody knows that this is,
okay.
Somebody talked about Iran being a paper tiger, so Israel is not a paper tiger, it's a tiger.
Okay. Wayne Allen Root, I want you to respond on that point of, the announcement being made on social media and how it's really difficult for a military to logistically implement it, say, for instance, as the Lieutenant General mentioned, when pilots are midair. There's also another point of view that is being expressed that, when Israel wanted the US's support, the B-2 bombers went in, they dropped in those bunker busters, which by all accounts was a huge blow for Iran and a huge help for Israel. But when President Trump has called in Israel to exercise restraint, that they're not listening. Is President Trump's statement then coming from that sense of hurt or from a sense of perhaps being used but not receiving, that kind of cooperation diplomatically speaking from Israel?
Question is to whom?
Who are you looking for to answer?
You. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we should, in the end,
Wayne, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. We work in close ties with the U.S., and there's no question about it. I wouldn't call it a proxy. We independently...
Let Wayne answer that question, please. I want Wayne to answer that because I was asking a specific question about President Trump and the U.S.'s position. Wayne, and then I'm going to come across to you, gentlemen. Yes.
I'm going to answer from the MAGA United States perspective, as in Make America Great Again. President Trump is the winner of this entire thing, and America is the winner, because we have made the point that America will answer whenever needed, that America will get involved whenever needed. Under Joe Biden, under Barack Obama, those things didn't happen. We have a strong president who stood up to a rogue terrorist nation and showed the world, if you screw with America, we will answer, we will respond, and we will fight you. But more importantly, from a MAGA perspective, because we're very anti-war in the MAGA movement. We don't want war. War is the last option. We're always for negotiating first. But if negotiations won't work, and if the other country refuses to abide, then we'll go to war as a last resort. This is not Iraq. This is not George Bush. This will not be a long war involving the United States. Trump bombed nuclear facility sites only. He did not bomb the people of Iraq, and he got out. And that's what we're looking for with President Trump. We don't want any more long wars in the United States involving the Middle East or anywhere else. This is perfect response by Trump and the United States, and he showed the world that we will react when needed to react. No one's going to ever push America around again with Donald Trump as president.
Okay, I want to bring in Lieutenant General Riddler on that point. Lieutenant Riddler, very interesting point being made that militarily, this is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. It's a completely new paradigm in which the U.S. is operating. And clearly, there are some lessons to have been learned from what has happened over the last few decades.
Correct.
Yeah. No, that point is taken. See, Iraq and Afghanistan, the situation was different because there were boots on ground. In Iran, there are no boots on ground of American soldiers, and it is just fly in, drop the bombs, and fly out. And which was operation carried out to precision. No question on that, 100% granted. But the point is, after having dropped those bombs, whatever damage they have caused, and the Vice President wants today saying that 400 kg of enriched uranium is missing, now have the Americans also achieved the aim with which they came for? And has the end state been reached? My point is there only militarily. Unless your aim is achieved, unless you have reached the end stage which was desired, the war has not been won by you.
You want to come in on that, Asher? Of course, from US's perspective, we've heard what has been stated by Wayne Allen Root, but the question still remains. Is there still unfinished business as far as Israel is concerned?
Israel never set as a goal to destroy 100% the nuclear and ballistic missile program because it was clear that that is not a feasible goal. Israel's goal was to conduct significant damage to those programs so that they no longer pose an existential threat to the state of Israel, and that goal has been achieved in an almost unbelievable manner. History books will look at Israel's operation as one of the most successful operations thousands of miles from our border in history. So I think, look, the ceasefire is holding. My children in Jerusalem are going to go back to school tomorrow. tonight Israelis will go to sleep safer and more secure because of the bravery of our military and because of the success of our operation and because of the great partnership with our greatest friend and ally, the United States of America.
Nima Tavalli, you find that funny? You feel the ceasefire is not going to hold?
Everything said here by these lunatics that you've gone, except for the Indian gentleman who is the only one who seems to live in reality.
Let's be a little calm, please.
The only one who seems to live in reality.
Nobody called you any names. Let's be a little calm while having this debate, please.
Reality as it is, not as the way that they wish it was said by your fellow countryman, the Indian gentleman who lived in reality. And if I may build on his point, the point is this. This was never about Iran's nuclear program. Iran negotiated for 7 years about that. The JCPOA that Iran agreed to, which was a horrible deal for Iran, Donald Trump walked out of it, not Iran. Iran abided by it and still is following large parts of it. Listen, this was a failed coup and regime change operation by the same actors that always try to do it. It exploded spectacularly in their face. There are reports in Zionist American media reporting that over the last 12 days, Iran has damaged Israel for the lovely tune of $500 billion. You know who's going to pay for that? You're going to do that, Mr. Make America Great Again. Your taxes are going to pay for that. So you're about as much Make Great America Again as I'm in line to be the next Queen of England. What you are is Make Israel Great Again. That's what it is. And it's as simple as that. And that's why I'm laughing, because the whole world is laughing at you.
Wayne Allen Root, you want to comment on that? Because, you know, it is a...
I want to comment on that because I've got to run. I've got to run. It's my last comment. I think what's simple about all of this is I could say whatever I want. No one will ever hurt me. That's why America's a great nation. I could be for Trump. I could be against Trump. We're allowed to have opinion in America. But this Iranian journalist who says he's not speaking for the Iranian country, if he says the wrong thing, he goes home and he gets murdered tomorrow, or he gets in prison and tortured tomorrow. That's the kind of regime you're talking about in Iran. He forgets to mention when he says how wonderful and they've played so well, and they're such good boys and girls, that they funded October 7th, where literally thousands of Israelis were murdered, their heads cut off. Babies murdered, their heads cut off. Women gang raped and then shot in the head. People burned alive. Families burned alive. I'm sorry, but when someone does that to you, you're allowed to attack back. That's called self-defense. And to allow that nation to have nukes is to ask for the entire world to be on fire or to be held hostage. So we're not going to allow that to ever happen again, and there will never be another October 7th. And if that was the message that was sent by this war, then that was a success by Israel and the United States of America. With that, I got to run, gentlemen. Thank you.
Okay, Nima Tavalli, quick response. But Wayne, I just want 1 minute. All right, Wayne is left. But Nima Tavalli, your quick response to that.
Well, everything he just said was once more a lie. There were no beheaded babies. There were no mass rapes. In fact, we know this from Israeli Zionist media as well. I mean, look, this is all they've got. And as for talking about free speech, how many people in the United States have been arrested for being pro-Palestine? What about a certain gentleman called Julian Assange? Ever heard about him? Look, these people have been lying for 77 years. And now the rest of the world sees through it. And that's why they're getting so emotional and they got to run and they got to do this and that and the other. Nobody buys this nonsense anymore. And it's just a joke to most people every time they open their mouths. Just
okay,
like
quick
that.
response. Quick response from Asha. Asha, quick 30-second response, please. Almost out of time.
I think it's incredibly clear that somebody who has this anti-Semitic ideology, like our esteemed panelist, if he represents the regime, it is absolutely forbidden to allow them to achieve nuclear weapons. Iran has a clock in Tehran counting down the minutes into Israel's destruction. The last thing that Israel, the United States, or anybody in the world can allow is to allow this regime to have nuclear weapons.
We'll have to leave it there. Completely out of time, gentlemen. Lieutenant General KJS Dhillon, Wayne Allen Root, Dr. Doron Avital, Asher Friedman, and Nima Tavalli. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening.